Merci, Kathleen. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. J'espère que vous appréciez notre déjeuner crucial ici as we tackle some of the meaty issues facing global shipping today. And with me, I have two key global leaders. I have Emanuele Grimaldi, head of Grimaldi Shipping out of Italy, who is chair of ICS and CEO of his company, and Guy Platten, who is CEO of the International Chamber of Shipping, the global industry association based out of London. And I'll remind the room that shipping tends to be a proxy for the state of our global economy. So I think much of what we have to say today is very reflective throughout the economy of which many of you, of course, are directly engaged. And whether in Canada or abroad, shipping plays a key role in maintaining the quality of life for people around the world. And I say from the perspective of maintaining key supply chains, certainly shipping is critical. And in terms of serving the economy and certainly in terms of achieving sustainability goals. I'm sure, Emanuele and Guy, that you would agree the discussion we're about to have comes at a critical time for shipping. We're confronting a new normal of many pressures, whether it be generally increased global tensions, unilateral regulation that we're facing in different countries, trade barriers, of course, climate-related risk is front and center for us, and climate change, weather changed patterns affecting how we navigate safely. Panama is a wonderful example of that recently. The energy transition, I'm probably missing something. Labor disruption would be certainly an issue that Canadians know well at the moment. Paul Desmarais just 2 days ago in this chair on this stage said something I thought was quite profound. He said that when summarizing the challenge that we're all facing, he said, you know, my generation has never had to deal with geopolitical risk in the way we are having to do today. And I think that's very true for many of us, and it's certainly facing shipping front on. All of these black swan events, all of the canals drying up, as it were, changes in the way global trade is conducted. These are all converging, it seems, into one big, huge sort of chunk of uncertainty, if I can put it that way. So let's get right into it. We want to cover four themes today, uncertainty being one of them, regulatory and trade nationalism, supply chain resilience, and finally, let's not forget, given that it's 2024, everyone seems to be announcing elections and calling snap elections. We have them around the globe, certainly in this continent, over in Europe. And so it's election time in 2024, and maybe Emanuele and Guy, you may have some advice to put into the asks of our politicians going forward, how they can better reflect and regulate and put policies together affecting world trade and affecting shipping. So Emanuele, as a global leader in moving finished automobiles around the world, you're based in Italy. We see lots of efforts to reduce carbon emissions and protect the environment, having to become foremost priorities for all organizations, not just shipping, driven in large part by, I would say, four key stakeholder groups, investors, consumers, certainly industry peers and governments. They're all driving this change. Please give us your perspective about what you see with respect to how marine shipping is responding to each of these stakeholder groups.
Thank you, Bruce. It's a long question. Thank you very much for having me, first of all, and the ICS here. I have the privilege of being the chairman of this association. And first of all, I would like to state that our association and the National Association of part of the ICS, which they represent 90% of the shipping community, they have been extremely responsible, because even before the IMO, which is the United Nations agency that is taking care of shipping, we have been advocating, the zero emission in 2050. So we have been very ambitious and very responsible for this. Recently, also, the IMO, the United Nations, has decided that we have to reach this net zero within 2050. Now the question is that this is not going to be an easy ride, because today we do not have the fuels, we do not have the engine, we do not have the ships, we do not have the places where to bunker our ships with the new fuels. So it's going to end. Our business is considered worldwide one of the hardest to abate sector, since we have to move big ships for long hauls, and that is not technically easy. But the solutions are there, and we are working on them. There will be multiple solutions. Probably the family of the hydrogen is one of the possibility with ammonia or hydrogen. Another one will be methanol, which probably is applicable easier, particularly to the passenger ships. For small hauls and small ships, probably electrification is also a solution. So there are probably nuclear with a new safe nuclear in the future. So there are several possibilities, and we must invest in all of them and keep open all the doors for all this new technology.
Well, governments, and you just mentioned that your industry is responding well to governments. They represent the public interest ultimately. What about investors? How is the industry responding to investors?
No, you're talking about investment. Of course, there are particularly for the ones who are making the change, they can easily find in banks who can invest in this type of change. Today, what it is possible to do, and I think it's something that we have to do as early as possible, is to reduce the amount of energy used to move the goods. And this can be done with a result up to 50% or even less of the energy used to move the same type of ships. Every vessel that we are building, we as Grimaldi, and we have over 30 vessels under construction, they all have a footprint which is less than 50% of the vessel that we are scrapping tomorrow. So today there are several solutions, and of course it is needed billions of dollars to be invested in this. We should not forget that the world fleet is made of 90,000 ships. And of course this is a huge investment, trillions of dollars have to be invested into this business.
Well, and ships as an asset have a long life compared to many other capital assets. And so having the foresight to predict in an unpredictable world where regulations will be and where policies will be is part of that challenge as an investor, because they have a long-term view. Increasingly, we're in a short-term world, it seems. And so that can be quite a challenge from an investor perspective in the shipping world.
It is true, but we shouldn't be shy.
Yep.
I think that of course scares a lot of the investors because of course you cannot, probably you will not be given a second chance in case you make big mistakes. But said this, I think there are different solutions, and today you have not to be shy, and I think you have to invest in this because that is the only way forward. Probably not all the progress can be made early, but at the same time. But I think we have to progress with the investment, and I think you receive huge satisfaction because we shouldn't forget that the biggest cost for shipping is the bunkers. So the fact of saving bunkers, not only saving the environment and probably reduce the CO2, but it's also a very important saving for the companies.
Yep.
I think we have been in our company able to save close to 1 million tons of fuel on our 120 ships, and that of course makes a big difference.
Yep. Guy, just from on that sustainability question and just a bit of context, we often talk in Canada about the opportunity to work with governments who run the municipal and in the provincial highway system to work with innovative ways to perhaps attract more trucks off the roadways onto those longer marine highways. And every truck that can be removed from the highway gives you about an 85% reduction in GHGs alone. So there's a growing, I think, acceptance in this country, and we're comparing ourselves to rail as well, which is diesel in this country. It's not electric, and certainly air has its challenges from a GHG emission. So increasingly, there is recognition that in fact, marine is the green mode. And so do you have any comments about, again, addressing those stakeholder groups from an environmental perspective?
Yeah, thanks very much, Bruce. I mean, shipping is the most energy efficient way of moving cargo, full stop. There's no more efficient way of doing it. And yet we still are committed to getting to net zero by 2050. We believe the technology is coming. What we're going to be missing is the availability of the fuels. So this is where governments need to really up their game now. And we use maybe 5% of fuels. The rest of the 95% is used by other industries and other people. So, whilst there's a lot of pressure on the industry to decarbonise shipping, we've got to remember actually shipping is going to be the facilitator for the wider decarbonisation, the energy transition. So there's huge opportunities. Here is in Canada in terms of the production of the new fuels. And shipping is definitely there up there. I think IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, says over 50% of the new fuels will be moved by ship. So we have a big challenge ahead of us. But we also need governments to up their game. I mean, when you get a ship owner, any businessman standing up at a conference saying, we want more regulation, which is unusual. We do, because we need to have that level playing field. We've put forward proposals to help decarbonise. For example, we are looking to have some sort of pricing mechanism for fossil fuels in order to encourage the uptake of new fuels. But we need good regulation, and we need governments to actually get around the table at the UN, at the International Maritime Organization, to agree these things. We also need governments to start looking strategically about how we're going to move these new fuels and where they're going to be produced, and to get the framework. So we have an initiative, Clean Energy Marine Hubs, which actually Canada is a leader of, in order to try and get a blueprint to show governments around the world how we're going to do this. But the issue with all of this, we will have to move concurrently if we're going to achieve. There's not a sequential thing here. We've all got to move concurrently, but I believe there's opportunities for shipping, but there's a big challenge ahead.
Well, and it's a two-sided challenge / opportunity, which is an interesting way you put it. On the one side, of course, given that ships are fueled by fuel, as it were, powered by fuel, finding the right sort of energy solutions for the future to power our ships is critical. But then on the other side of the coin, as you say, is the opportunity side, perhaps, in terms of moving exciting new cargoes by ship, which makes so much sense. And as you say, being such an efficient mode, that ultimately is going to be the way to move. Also, infrastructure is a challenge here, Guy, and I'm just wondering if you have any comments about how important infrastructure will be to meet our accomplish our net zero goals.
It's going to be essential, and it's going to be built at scale to make this happen. And when there's some good examples around the world, but it's really got to move quickly now. And it's not just about, we need to de-risk some of the investments, so that's part of the Clean Energy Marine Hubs. So we need governments to put in place the licensing regimes, de-risk it so we can get the infrastructure going. But it's I haven't got a figure in my head, but it's trillions of dollars if we're going to build the infrastructure needed to actually manage the transition.
And the infrastructure to support those green energy hubs, presumably the ports, assuming that they are going to be a center point of the transition, are going to have to be supported and will have to be enhanced. Not just from a climate change perspective, they'll have to be ready to handle different weather events, but of course to be able to facilitate the movement of those fuels.
And also there's a wider societal debate as well. So, for example, as Emanuele said, it's likely to be hydrogen-based fuels will be that. But if we use a common one, which is ammonia, which is often touted as the fuel which we'll go to, there's, would you like to have an ammonia tank farm placed at the end of your road? So we've got to have that wider debate about the safety and how we do all of these things, and we can't afford to wait for this now.
Well, that's public acceptability, and I find this an interesting area because we're not yet perhaps debating enough and calming people down. Although I do notice a change in public attitudes a little bit. 6 months ago, there was very little global discussion about nuclear as a potential fuel of the future. Now the debate is starting to open up about that possibility, and I suspect that people are getting more comfortable with the modern nuclear production capability that can very easily fit onto a ship and very safely. And so that's going to be a whole interesting. But it's this whole idea of public acceptability is something that we will have to start opening up the kimono on and having a good discussion to get people ready for those changes. Just in terms of regulatory and trade nationalism, Emanuele, and maybe I'll turn to you. And just picking up on a comment I made about, or that was made about by Mr. Desmarais in terms of global risk and geopolitical risks. Certainly, I think as a principle, the industry is the epitome of a world trading enterprise that requires consistency and predictability and a level playing field. Guy used those words. That certainly has to be maintained, and we have to have fair trading relations. Those are all critical issues for a successful shipping industry. And so I'm just wondering, Emanuele, from a regulatory and trade nationalism perspective, do these threats, how serious are they from your perspective, and what do we need to do to address those threats?
Recently, I must say that we have navigated through extremely troubled waters. We had so many black swans, starting from the pandemic to the unfortunate war and the aggression of Russia with Ukraine. Then we had now the Houthis and Yemen and the Red Sea. Ships have to do a long haul, about 12 days more of navigation to reach Europe from the Far East.
To go around South
Africa. Yep. So, but shipping has proved to be extremely resilient. Probably more than what everybody would have predicted, particularly during the pandemic that stopped everything else during a long period of time. But I must say this is very much thanks also to the human element, that the seafarers that have done an extraordinary work. And they have not been necessarily also recognized because they didn't get, let's say, a precedence in when it was the vaccination. Probably in some countries they have not been even hospitalized. So I think that we have to reckon, and today, they are at risk. When they pass through the Red Sea, they are at risk, and some crews are even today kept in Yemen, and since November. It's a very long period of time. And this is something really criminal. And these people are totally innocent, have nothing to do with what's happening in the world.
They're being held hostage.
So I think really, today there is a scarcity of seamen. And we, as International Chamber of Shipping, gave a full priority to the seamen. And we had last year our annual general meeting in Manila, because it's the country that is contributing more to the seafarers. And I think over 800,000 of them, they belong to the Filipino. And there we have tried, together with the ITF and with the unions from all over the world, try to understand why there is this scarcity and how we can contribute to have more seafarers. Because there is a very nice study that was done by the Greek shipowners, which is the biggest community of shipowners in the world, that probably without shipping, the world would come at a standstill. Shipping is necessary. This is something that the Latin discovered 2,000 years ago. Navigare necesse, this is what they say. And exactly, this is the truth story. But this is also particularly due to our seafarers that are today also risking their lives.
So that it's a tremendous human cost in terms of impacting our crews. We saw that during COVID when they were stuck, in these horrendously long crew assignments. It went on for months because the ships weren't allowed to exchange their crews at a port of call. It took a tremendous toll on the mental well-being of crew members. And in another way, we're seeing, as you say, with the Houthis, and directly, crew members are being held hostage, literally, which is outrageous when you think about it. Guy, you seem to be keen to...
Yeah, it's not just that, we're seeing increasing criminalisation of seafarers as well.
True.
So drugs, for example, being found on board ships, which are no fault of the crew, and what they tend to do is put the captain in jail, waiting while they do the investigation. We had one captain who was in a Mexican jail for 20 months before we could get him out. He was totally innocent. He was the one who reported the drugs on board to the authorities. And so we've seen this increasingly around the world. And again, it's hardly an attraction for seafarers. So and as Emanuele said, without shipping, the world would not move. So it's really important. And we need to make the case for shipping as well, and all these fronts, and also for our seafarers.
What great points. And what about other stakeholders who, again, we look at some of these nationalistic Emanuele movements just south of the border. We're facing an issue right now. Not only are some of the goods that are being exported or rather imported to the States being subjected to new tariffs, electric vehicles and aluminum and steel products coming from China are all being subjected. Even made in China ships might be subjected one day to a new fee for every ship that arrives at a U.S. port. That's under investigation by the USTR. Surely one of the impactful groups will be consumers themselves. I mean, this is potentially inflationary. Do you have any views on that?
Yes, I think that this is the biggest risk that we are facing today. For decades, we have been advocating and fighting for free trade. And I think a lot was accomplished in the last decades. But unfortunately, I can see that now everything is reversing, and we see countries putting up barriers, sanctions, and the free trade is really under severe risk. And this, of course, will bring only poverty. It was established years ago, and a lot of important study, including one made by the ICS with the Harvard University. It is that the free trade and, of course, the reduction of taxes and impositions would generate a growth, significant growth of the GDP. Instead, what is happening today is exactly the opposite. And it is really also difficult to understand in such an interconnected world what is happening. When you look, for instance, at what is happening with the Chinese car, big barriers imposed in the United States. But when we look, Tesla, which is an American company, has the biggest factory in China. And probably the second biggest shareholder of BYD is Warren Buffett. So, and you see that the cars produced in China cannot enter the United States unless you pay 100% tax. Same applies today. I think we have the new barriers that have been made by the Europeans with the Chinese cars. But probably somebody forgot that the best-selling car in China was a Volkswagen car, so a German car. And Mercedes, Volkswagen, and BMW are selling 4 million cars in China, which is the biggest market of the world. But now we are putting barriers and taxes that before they used to be only 10%, in a strange way, and also with differences among the different Chinese. This is what I'm reading this morning. I was reading this morning that there will be 16%, for instance, for BYD, 20% for Geely, 25% for someone else, 30% for someone else. This is inconceivable, something that we have not seen. We have been studying for years and for that how important is the free trade and how important is the exchange. And of course, there is nothing more infectious and I would say, contagious than this protectionism, because very soon we will see taxes on the expensive cars built in Europe, which are sold in China, probably on our wines, on the wines coming from France, from Italy, and so on, and the Ferraris that are arriving. I saw a lot of Ferraris in Shanghai that would be taxed. So I think this will not bring anywhere.
Well, and
I'm very worried about this.
Well, and that's Me Tooism and retribution, and countries will fight back with their own tariffs, and so suddenly it's an escalation in the wrong direction. Because as you made a very good point, and it's very clear that there's direct evidence shown over history between a reduction in barriers and and poverty elimination, and so we have a risk of doing the opposite now, which is a terrible thing. And Guy, you may want to enter in on this.
It's this populism around. I think we need to start making the case strongly for free trade and actually remind people that it does lift people out of poverty. There's a natural reaction is I want to protect this industry here or protect that industry there, but actually it has the opposite effect of what you intended. And we're sort of getting back to somewhere in the 1930s. We had massive amounts of protectionism, and we seem to have forgotten the lessons we learned post-Second World War. We freed up trade and see how the world economies have grown as a result of that.
History has a tendency to repeat itself, unfortunately, and so we have to remain stewards of history and keep historical knowledge front and center, and remind people, as you say, about those lessons learned. And we're really talking about supply chain resilience, and you did mention earlier in the conversation, Emanuele, that shipping certainly showed how well it could be resilient, starting with COVID, and certainly some things emerging after COVID. But at some point, we really do have to worry about our potential resiliency. And we're at a time now when we have a lot of negative challenges, it seems, potentially being thrown at the industry. So in terms of lessons learned, Guy, what can we do to convince the public and convince governments that free trade is a good thing? And is there an incumbency on the shipping industry to tell a better narrative and a better story about the value and the benefits of open
Absolutely,
trade?
but it's not just the shipping industry, it's other industries as well. I think we all need to collectively remind politicians and the wider public the benefits that trade gives in terms of decent paying jobs. So it's on us to do that. And I think we've been lulled into a false sense of security, but we really are seeing in recent years these protectionist methods being introduced, which are going to have a negative effects for everybody.
Exactly. So that then perhaps, and we just have a couple of minutes left, but I'm now going into our fourth area, election asks. We find ourselves in a lead up to major elections that will take place in many G8 countries in 2024 across the globe. Mr. Macron just called a surprise election. UK has one coming up of all dates, July 4th. Reflecting on the discussions so far, what do you think are the most important messages for governments to hear from the marine shipping industry and the larger business community? To Guy's point, if we're sort of looking at a coalition of interests coming together, what are the 1, 2, or 3 messages that we have to urge politicians and potential politicians to put on the table?
Again, we come back to the discussion that we have. Free trade, paramount important. We have to start again a multilateral approach and try to have and to see things also from the other part perspective. Then when we come also to the decarbonization, we have to understand that we cannot be too radical, but we have to be ambitious, but at the same time we have to be practical, keep all open the various options that are available now, and work for practical solutions, and try to engage everybody, because this is not going to be, for instance, in the shipping industry, we cannot do this alone.
Right.
We need all the stakeholders, and not only the stakeholders, because really, what Guy was saying, we will be also facilitators of, we will be transporting these new fuels. In all the studies that we have looked, more than 50% of the new fuels will be transported by sea. And we have still to build the ships to move the ammonia, the methanol, and all. We need to bunker with the ports, so we need the ports. We need the refineries. We need everybody to be engaged. So really, it's a huge effort that has to be done together, and of course, it has to be governed by regulation.
Are we articulating well enough, Guy, the downsides of populism, the downsides of protectionism, and translating those into messages that people can understand at a common level, if I can put it that way, an easy to understand way?
That's our duty to do that now. I mean, we've got a series of conferences coming up. We've got one it's tomorrow here in Montreal. It's going to start off that conversation where we can get our arguments together. We've got another one in Hong Kong later in the year in November, and then in Athens next year. So we need to do more as an industry to really get the logical arguments for what we're trying to achieve here. And we've got to tell the politicians that these are complex challenges and there's no simple solutions here. And I think that's what's missing at the moment. Perfect.
Well, on that note, I see we're at the bewitching hour. Hopefully we've started to convert some of the people in this room, and they too can be missionaries for some of these messages. Lots of work to do, and I thank you both for joining us today, and congratulations, and thank you very much for listening.